All right. Welcome back, everyone. So my name's Mark Shasro, CEO of Sheco. For those of you that don't know me, we've had a great start to the day. After lunch break now, we've got our next international speaker, Professor Toby Peters from the University of Birmingham, UK. Toby is well known in the industry. He's coined the term of clean cooling. And today he's going to talk specifically about clean cooling and what that means to our industry, but looking at a big picture perspective, making us realize that we are off target globally when it comes to all sectors, all emissions, and that cooling has a key role to play. And if we're really to provide cooling for all in a sustainable way, we've got to really change the technology and think big picture and think systems. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Toby. We will have questions after his presentation. So over to you, Toby.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for inviting me to join this. Apologies for not connecting properly. So the effects of lack of cooling are complex and far-reaching. They affect health, food, education, productivity, to name a few. And in a warming world, prosperity and civilization depend more and more on access to cooling, from cold chains to air conditionings. But the growing demand for cooling will contribute, or is contributing, significantly to climate change. And this is from the emissions of HFCs and other refrigerants, CO2, and emissions from the mostly fossil fuel-based energy powering the equipment. So as the climate warms, the growing demand for cooling is creating more warming in sort of what's a destructive feedback loop. I think we need to be clear that at the moment, the world is off track to meet its objectives of the Paris Agreement, and we're also off track to meet our targets for the Sustainable Development Goals. At the moment, about 1 billion people don't have access to cooling and suffer the consequences. And recent reports suggest that unchecked warming and absent mitigation will result in 1 to 3 billion people by 2070 being exposed to annual temperatures warmer than nearly anywhere today. So how the world meets these challenges and provides cooling services for a growing number of people is going to have really important ramifications for climate, environment, and economic productivity. Just very quickly, let's have a look at where we are. So refrigeration today accounts for about 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And yet we are also deploying more than 10 pieces of cooling equipment per second. This is projected to rise to about 19 pieces over the next 30 years. Energy consumption is going to triple, and so based on that, we are going to see our energy budget for cooling exceed the IEA's Paris Climate Agreement by about more than 50%. And interestingly, the growth is coming in the developing world. But that's not the real problem. The big problem is that if we want to deliver cooling for all and actually address the 1 billion people who don't have access to cooling, we could be looking at 14 billion appliances consuming 19,000 terawatt hours of energy by 2050. So that's actually, going to be potentially consuming more than 100% of the projected renewables capacity. That's the challenge we're facing. How do we deliver cooling for all? There's also another new problem. For example, is that while scientists are moving at unprecedented speed to develop a vaccine and manufacture a vaccine, we've actually got to deliver it to potentially 5 billion people. And that's going to require a cold chain of a size and magnitude we haven't yet envisaged. Let's not forget that at the moment, we lose more than 25% of vaccines, sometimes 50%, due to lack of cold chains. And we've got 18 months to deliver this. And if we don't get it right, if we don't do it sustainably, we are going to embed dirty technologies in the system, which will remain there for some 10 years to come. The challenge is that everybody is talking to green electricity and energy efficiency. But I think there's one really telling number which is so important. in 2017, the world achieved 94 gigawatts of solar generation capacity was added. That was the largest amount of deployment in any year. In that year, the energy demand of the new space cooling capacity, just the room air conditioners, was 100 gigawatts. So air conditioning alone is outpacing our deployment of solar. For this reason, what's really clear to me is that we can't simply look at greening electricity and energy efficiency to solve this challenge. We've got to look at step change, radical innovation. The challenge is that I think when people think about energy, they mean electricity, and when they talk about energy storage, they mean batteries. And this blurring of concepts matters because it fails to recognize some basic energy facts of life. A large slice of our consumption comes in the form of thermal energy, and one of the fastest growing sectors of energy demand over the next 20 years is cooling. And the question is, can cooling be better served by energy carriers other than electricity and batteries? In very simple terms, if we want to store solar energy to use at peak demand, is it better to put it in lithium ion or actually in a block of ice? And likewise, if we want to transition to electric vehicles, we have to remember that on a bus in a hot country, or you can see 45% of the energy consumption of that bus is for the cooling load. Those are the challenges we face. So from my perspective, what we need to do is we actually have to change the question. We have to think about what is the service we require and backcast how can we provide it in the least damaging way, rather than this old-fashioned question of how much electricity do I need to generate. And in so doing, we can then start taking a systems approach to cooling. We can start thinking about what's the cooling requirement. How do we make cold? How do we move cold? How do we store cold? How do we finance cold? And how do we manage cold? And once we start doing that, we really can start looking at the system and thinking about all the ways that we can meet our cooling demand in a sustainable way. As a first step, for a government to ensure that the cooling needs of their populations are met equitably and sustainably, especially for the most vulnerable, they need to actually understand what these needs are. How much cold chain will be required to enable farmers' incomes to double by 2025? How do we end hunger and malnutrition? How much cold chain is needed to provide access to vaccines? How many degrees of cool comfort is required to avoid heat stress at home or in the workplace? In short, what needs must be met in a country to meet the SDGs with no one left behind? And an underestimation of the scale of the cooling demand, its impact on energy consumption, I think risks contributing to a lack of ambition in policies, infrastructure and technology developments, as well as capacity building. And that will have far-reaching social, economic, environmental consequences. We've developed a first-of-a-kind needs-based assessment for cooling for all to underpin the country-scale cooling action plans. And this is important because a focus on per capita equipment penetration rates presupposes a top-down technical solution to cooling needs and risks, and it ignores the possibility of electricity demand mitigation through the redesign of systems, the aggregation of demand, modal shifts, better building insulation, the use of waste or currently untapped resources, as well as support for existing cooling practices and behaviors. Building on the needs assessment, the next step is the solution. So we're also developing a solutions toolkit, which takes a whole system, holistic approach to suggest integrated coordination of planning, implementation, energy choices, business models, and system management to enable a country's cooling action plan to focus on cooling for all whilst meeting climate targets. Within this, we want to look at how do you reduce, shift, and improve. So how do you fundamentally reduce the demand for cooling from the very basics of putting doors on refrigerators in supermarkets, through to cool roofs, building designs? How do you shift from potentially using electricity to harnessing waste cold or waste heat? And how can you improve and make the system more efficient? And within that, we're looking at 4 solutions categories. Of course, these include technologies, but equally, we've got to think about the services, the policies, and the finance to build an environment for investment in clean cooling solutions. So in short, a framework of 3 cooling needs: health, food, and thermal comfort, 5 solutions, and 4 solution pillars to try and deliver cooling for all. In parallel, and this is, I think, the key element, is working with Mark and Sheko. We're working also on a first-of-kind clean cooling sustainability and assessment audit to set the standards that are in line with Paris Agreement on climate change, the Kigali Amendment, and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We've got to move from having unquantified sustainable cooling to having clear targets of what has to be achieved, with a series of questions by which cooling projects can be audited by stakeholders, including governments, planners, and banks. I think the advantages of employing such an assessment include understanding and meeting societal and economic cooling needs, mitigating the need for active cooling, maximizing the available resources, the waste cold, the waste heat, as I said before, and ensuring the long-term sustainability of cooling projects, seeing where there's room for improvement. And so combined with the needs assessment and the solutions toolkit, this, I think, will really help governments identify where the current regulations perform well and where they need to be redefined or improved. It will help project owners with transparency about their actions in supporting sustainability, which will boost their reputation. And it will encourage stakeholders to consider alternative clean cooling solutions, synergies between processes, passive cooling designs. Those are just some of the examples. And this approach, it takes a system approach to cooling. It starts using the 7 stages of planning cold, making cold, storing cold, moving cold, using, managing, and financing cold, but then assesses them against 4 key pillars: social well-being, environmental integrity, economic efficiency, and resilience. Between this, there are then the interdependencies of social ecological integrity, social economic well-being, and economic environmental efficiency. Each pillar will have indicator categories and questions to audit the project, and we aim to launch this for peer review in the early autumn for full launch before the end of the year. And I think this audit will really transition us from seeing incremental energy efficiency to fundamental change in clean cooling, with a clear set of high standards, the highest standards which are necessary if we're going to deliver cooling for all and deliver Paris and the Kigali Amendment in parallel. So, in closing, in a warming world, access to sustainable cooling, clean cooling, is not a luxury. This is an issue of equity, and it's a service that we must deliver to all. And it's not just about air conditioners or refrigerators in every home. It's about providing more sustainable and affordable solutions to address the needs of the vulnerable, such as access to nutritious food, safe medicines, access to a COVID-19 vaccination, as well as protection from heat. And we have to do this as the world transitions to clean energy. Clean and sustainable cooling must come to the forefront of global agendas if we're going to mitigate extreme global temperature rise and meet the UN's SDGs. And we need to work globally and collaboratively across all sectors to create and launch this effective strategy to enable cooling for all. It does require a holistic systems approach to understand the needs and to respond to them with appropriate technology skills and training. And I believe this audit is one of the key steps to achieve this. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Toby. We have a few minutes for questions from the audience. So if you want to send in your questions, now is the moment. Until then, I guess I have a few questions for Toby. Toby, are you optimistic right now about this? Do you think that we're actually going to deliver as an industry? Are we going to get clean cooling, or is this just wishful thinking? You look at the challenges that we're facing right now, and you basically said we can green the electricity, which we're doing, but it's way off target. We can push energy efficiency, but that's not going to do it. That's not going to be enough. So, these are huge challenges. How realistic is our agenda of clean cooling? How realistic?
Well, I think, can we do it? Yes. I mean, when you look at technology, you're seeing things like the Global Cooling Prize, which is showing the ability to achieve 80% reduction. You're seeing the work you're doing on natural refrigerants. We have the ability to harness waste heat for cooling. We have the ability to harness waste cold. So I think, one, we have the technical capacity to do it. We have the technical capability to design buildings to be energy efficient for cooling. Two, we're starting to see, great leaps forward. We're seeing Sustainable Energy for All with their cooling action plans or their cooling solutions, Cool Coalition with cooling action plans. We're seeing a lot of momentum there. What I think we now need to see, and we saw last week, the report published by the IEA and UNEP, which showed that if we can double efficiency, we can see massive savings in our energy demand. What we now have to see, I think, is two things. We need to see performance standards which drive up to actually deliver the size of the challenge. Incremental improvement is not good enough. So we have to drive that standard, and we have to see the industry rise to the challenge. It's no point having a global cooling prize and not having minimum efficiency performance standards aligned to it over the next 5 or 10 years. So from my perspective, I think we're starting to see the momentum, but I think we've got to be bolder and actually really get people to understand the size of the challenge and set the target. If we do that, I think we can achieve the goal. And the start point, and I don't mean to keep coming back to it, this is why this audit is so important, because it's about setting a benchmark to actually deliver that 300% requirement in energy efficiency.
I mean, the audit, the whole methodology, that's why SHECO partnered up with the Center for Sustainable Cooling and obviously yourself. So we think it's vital to moving the industry forward, leveraging all the work that's been done with natural refrigerants over the last couple of decades that SHECO has been intimately involved in. But, I don't know, it's sometimes the industry has always done incremental change. And I just feel like we're starting to run out of time. And I just hope, and obviously on behalf of SHECO and my colleagues, we're going to be fully behind the clean cooling agenda and have been so far, and pushing that. But we need help. We need everyone. We need really the whole industry to understand the opportunity of clean cooling. I think the audit and how they can get involved will be critical for that, because then they will see that as an asset, as something that's useful for them to grow their businesses. And I think that will be a key moment when this all comes out later in the year. It's just I would just like us to move faster. And I guess the pandemic has slowed that process down. What's your take on that, Toby?
Yeah, we do need to move fast, but this is why I think actually one of the really important things is we've got to change the debate, because we're still focused on how do we green electricity, but yet our big demand for energy is cooling. As I said very simply, we can use a block of ice as a very good way of shifting energy rather than lithium-ion battery. It's a lot cheaper, it's a lot cleaner, it's a lot more efficient. So it's about this system thinking, which is complex for governments and challenging, but it's about how do we harness waste heat? How do we harness the waste cold of LNG? All these elements. It is a big challenge, but we have to strive for it. What we've got to do is we have to be much more clear in our solutions, because it's no longer that, a little step in refrigerants is enough. We've got to be driving to natural refrigerants. We've got to be driving to energy demands or energy changes which aren't 4%, which are 80% plus.
Yes.
Can we do it? We have to do it. I mean, and I think people are realizing, when you look at the press, when you look at the general activity, people are realizing the world is getting hotter, and with that now they've got the cooling debate. I mean, let's not forget how far we've moved in getting cooling on the agenda, not just the refrigerant agenda and the Montreal Protocol and the Kigali Amendment, the energy agenda. We're seeing change now, and I think we're building momentum, but we've got to grab hold of it.
Absolutely. Very quickly, we've got a couple of minutes left. Thank you, Toby, for shortening your presentation after the technical issues we had just at the beginning. But just a couple of questions that we have from the audience. One, I'll read it out in case you can't see the screen. What are the chances of getting much more efficient domestic AC in the next few years? From Jeff Robinson. I guess you've already answered
that's a great, yeah. I know the answer to that. I'm on the judging panel of the Global Cooling Prize. We will be the Global Cooling Prize will be demonstrating technologies over the course of the next 6 months in real world situations which can deliver an 80% reduction in energy cost of cooling for only twice the cost. The challenge now.
That's 80, not 8. That's not 18. That's 80.
80.
That's a huge difference. That's never been done before in our industry.
Never been done before. The industry was saying it couldn't be done. We'd keep with incremental. We came out with the Global Cooling Prize, or Rocky Mountain Institute came out with it, and the industry, as well as innovators, rose to the challenge. The issue now is how do we actually drive that into the marketplace? We need to see the efficiency performance standards which companies set, which countries set, actually recognize what can be achieved. So once again, the technology is going to be proven. The industry is going to say that it's commercially viable as part of the prize. Then it's up to actually the government to drive that into the marketplace.
So I guess this leads to the final question, and you've got 60 seconds to go, Toby. We've got another question here from Priya Gandhi. What can each of us do to promote this tech methodology and accelerate adoption when governments are not always on board? This doesn't seem like something individuals can do. We need system change.
I think it's like all these things. Actually, governments respond to the public with electric vehicles or anything. It's about public pressure. I think what people need to do is actually recognize the impact of cooling, demand change, and see it happen. I mean, I think it's completely madness that in the UK that we still have, supermarkets without doors on refrigerators. It's a really simple change we should be expecting. So again, I think the audit is really important, because what the audit will do is it will allow the consumer to see whether or not projects are clean cooling. Are they using natural refrigerants? Are they mitigating the demand for cooling? Are they being smart?
Okay. Well, we had a couple more questions, Toby, and I'm sorry, but we're running out of time, so we'll have to take this. We'll have to close this off. But I want to personally give you a round of applause. I hope that everyone else who's watching this live right now is also sharing the applause. Thank you, Toby, and look forward to connecting with you soon. And thank you for your leadership, your intellectual leadership, which is very much needed right now in our industry.
Thanks a lot, Mark, and thank you for your support. Speak to you soon. Take care.
Bye-bye.